Let's begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we record today, the Turrbal and Yagara people, and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Hi, I'm Laurie from Truku Executive Search. Today I'm joined by Allan Cooney, CEO of NAPCO, the North Australian Pastoral Company. In this episode, we'll step beyond the title to explore the moments, influences, and decisions that have shaped Allan's leadership journey to date. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you, Laurie. Happy to be here.
Okay, first question. What was your very first job, and what did it teach you that you still use today?
My first job was a school job. So I was at school, and I wrote to my grandfather, and I wanted a holiday job. So I was 14 at the time, and what I didn't know when I wrote to my grandfather was that he considered a 14-year-old a man. So he said yes to the job, but he also gave me a man's job, so which meant that it was hard physical work. So, and the work was to use a chainsaw to trim branches off. And if you can imagine doing about 1,000 12-kilo kettlebell swings a day, that's sort of what the job was like, because you had to cut the branches off fairly high in the tree. So just swing this big heavy chainsaw up, cut the branch, and then swing it down, and then swing it up and swing it down like that. So I grew into physically I developed into a man then, but I'd come home at the end of the day as a 14-year-old and just fall asleep like I was. I had to be woken up to have dinner, and then I'd fall asleep again. So it was pretty tough. But that sort of stuff teaches resilience and the value of hard work.
Okay, on to a challenge. What was one of the biggest challenges you faced early in your career, and how did it prepare you for leadership later on?
I think I took over from my father in our family business. So I was a CEO at age 28, and it's an interesting thing being a CEO, because all of a sudden you're there by yourself. It's a very isolating job. My mother and father chuffed off to England and left me in charge of the business, which was 5 pastoral stations in Western Queensland, and said, "You'll be right. You'll look after it." So the biggest challenge was actually understanding what leadership meant, and I didn't think a lot about leadership at the time. I thought much more about management and what I needed to do to manage, and I learned a really solid lesson early on in dealing with people, because I've got a strong personality, and I've got a very clear idea of the way that I want things done, and dealing with staff, I had a number of people working for me. I used to say, this is what I want done, but I didn't really think about how to engage with people that were working with me. And one of the key people, about 10 weeks into this arrangement, said, "I've had enough. I don't want to work for you anymore." So, and resigned and left, which was a real shock. And it caused me to stop and reflect on what effect I was having on the people that were working with me. And I made a significant change in the way that I dealt with people. So I got a kick in the bum and a good lesson, and took the lesson and learnt it. You can never get a team behind you if you don't sort of think about how you work with people. I was constantly wanting to train and be better and better at what I did, and so I went out and got a second education, and a big part of that education was how to do business and how to lead and how to work with people and how to collaborate. And I was actually a founder of a couple of different organisations. One was a community-based organisation, which in Western Queensland at the time there was widespread rural poverty. And we had very high levels of suicide, particularly amongst men in that community at the time. And it really bugged me that people were pushed into a corner where they felt the only way out was to take their own lives. And it did happen to a couple of people. One in particular was a good friend of mine who just decided there was no way out. So we put together a group and we did financial counselling, and we did counselling on personal matters and all those sort of things. So that gave me a sort of sense of my community. The second one was there was a lot of farmers and graziers and rural people in business that were really struggling. So we put together a group for ourselves, and the idea being that we would hire a consultant to come and work with us and work with our businesses so that we could actually deal with some of the challenges. So we would also get training, and we would basically build ourselves and do professional development in a way that had never been done before. So I learned a whole bunch of skills out of that stood me in pretty good stead. And then my career sort of took a bit of a turn, because during that period, which was in the 1990s, to be a farmer in Western Queensland was pretty hard going. And then at the end of that period, we decided we'd close the family business. I went into a period where I was doing some consulting, but I got involved in a second group, which was dealing with the fallout of what happened with people that were exiting these various industries and exiting Western Queensland and having to start again. A part of that was career advice. Like, we had a process where you spoke to a psychologist, and then you spoke to a careers consultant, and so I did that process. I thought, I've set all this up, and there's no way known that I should not do it. And it was a very interesting exercise for me, because what I was told was not anything like what I expected. Surprisingly, they said, you should be in leadership, executive management, and I'd never really given it a thought before, even though I'd been doing it for some years by that time, like 10 or 15 years. I then decided that I would chase a career in management and senior management. And I set a few parameters around myself that I very much wanted to work with values-based organisations or companies. And I was approached to go to Alice Springs and work with an Aboriginal landowner group that were trying to commercialise access to their land. And this was a sort of a pivotal moment for me. Every time I spoke to organisations that wanted to work with this group, basically what they said is, this will never work. And I heard that maybe half a dozen times, and I woke up one day and I thought, I'm not going to wear that. I will make this work regardless of how much it takes or whatever. So I really threw myself into it, 100%. At one stage in that business, we had 15 consultants, and amongst that group there was 12 languages spoken. And we went out and bought, and found contracts, and we worked all across Northern Australia, and we worked in the sort of area between commercial projects, government, and Aboriginal landowners, and actually bringing those things together. We actually created 3 businesses out of that. Wow. So at the end of that, after 7 years of that, I was getting tired. Like, it was hard. It was hard yakka, and I think the effective life of a CEO is somewhere between 5 and 7 years anyway. I decided I needed something. I needed something new and different, and so I was talking to a friend of mine one night. Previously in his career, he'd been a doctor on an Antarctic expedition, and he said, the Antarctic Division looks for people like you to lead their expeditions in Antarctica. So I thought about it for a little while without really giving it serious thought, because Antarctic had never really caused a blip on my radar. It's a long way away and it's cold, and that's about all I knew about it. But so I got online one day and I read a little bit about it, and I thought, I'll open it up and see what the application process looks like. So what I was faced with was, do I do this? And you've got 2 hours to do it, or do I let the opportunity move on? And I thought, no, I'll do this. So 5:30 on a Friday afternoon, and my wife's ringing me and saying, where are you? And I said, I'm just trying to finish something. So anyway, I did it. I sent the application in, and to my absolute astonishment, I got a call about 6 weeks later that they were actually interested and wanted to interview me. So that started a ball rolling around. And it was one of those things in life where, for some reason or other, it just had this synergy where it just kept moving forward without me really working too hard at making it happen. So after the first phone call, there was a phone interview, and then there was Then there was a trip to Melbourne for another interview and a medical, and then there was psychological testing. So they did IQ and personality and a couple of other things. So I then got a call and said, we want to take you into a selection centre. So the selection centre for the the expedition leaders is a week-long camp in at that stage it was up in the mountains in Tassie in August, freezing cold, and for me that all of a sudden became serious. So it got real for me all of a sudden. So in the selection centre, camp up in the mountains is that you got 20 people, like they bring that 300 and odd people down to a group of 20, and then they put you in a camp, and you've basically got to compete for the job. I won't say it's like Survivor or SAS Australia or something like that, because it's not really like that, but it is like that. There's quite a bit of influence from the Australian SAS in the way they run it and all that sort of thing. And so they put a lot of pressure on you to make decisions and see how you handle pressure and make mistakes, and your ability to lead people that don't necessarily want to be led by you because they want to lead you, sort of thing. So there's that sort of dynamic going on in the background. So, and to my absolute astonishment, I got selected out of that process. And I must admit, when I got there was a brigadier from the Australian Army, there was a couple of Army colonels, superintendents of police, that sort of, those people that do professional leadership as a career there. And, I looked around the room and sized everybody up and thought, well, I'm probably in the wrong room here, so I might as well just enjoy the experience. Which is what I did. So, and I hadn't heard back from the Antarctic Division for some while. Could have been 2 months or something like that. And I was actually in an interview for another job, and I walked out of the interview and there was a message on my phone. So I called back the number, and it was the Antarctic Division. They said, we want to offer you a job in Antarctica. So, and it took me about a minute to make the decision. So I went back in and saw the people that had just interviewed me and said, sorry, I've decided to take another job. So that sort of started the whole Antarctic process. And that, from the time that I started with the Antarctic Division to the time I finished was 2 years. So, and in that 2 years, I had a year in Antarctica. And I did 2 trips down there. So that was again a sort of it was a watershed moment in my life, because as it turned out, what I thought was difficult in the camp up in the mountains in Tassie as a part of the selection centre was a doddle compared to what the job actually was. It's a very difficult role. It's a very isolating role to be the point person for an expedition in Antarctica, because you don't have anyone to support and every problem comes to you. So, and it had some serious challenges, but it was also a huge learning curve. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about people, and it's sort of coloured my life since, it's given me a good basis for going forward. But it's also made me aware of my weaknesses and things that I'm not good at. And now, instead of trying to be everybody's everything, I stick to the things I'm good at, and bring in, like from a leadership point of view, I make sure I've got people supporting me for the things that I'm not good at, and that's one of the probably key leadership lessons that I've got, and I would encourage anyone to have to take into account, that you need to surround yourself with good people, because otherwise you're not a leader. You're an island.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think this is really interesting. You're up against these incredibly accomplished people for the one role. Why do you think you got it out of everyone? What was kind of I know there were physical challenges and mental challenges and emotional challenges, and they break you down, and the fittest one at the end in all those spaces wins. But what do you think it came down to?
Yeah, look, I asked the people that did the selection that question, and it was 2 things. One was calm under pressure. They constantly stack the pressure on. There was long nights with no sleep and, out in the open in the cold and the rain and trekking over a mountain and all that sort of thing. And then they would put you in a position where you had to make a decision. So, I did years and years of hard yards, running a pastoral company in Western Queensland when there was nobody there to help make decisions, and all a lot of decisions were just wicked choices. Like there's no good answer to what you need to do, so you got to it's one of the lesser evils. So that was part of it. The other part of it was that, and one of the things that they particularly looked for was somebody that wanted the best for the team, not the best for themselves. I didn't think about it at the time. That was sort of my natural way of doing things, that I wanted the team to succeed, not necessarily myself. And I think it's a key leadership trait, to be honest.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of senior leaders can be very much like in a competition with their team or peers, or and that it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, you see a lot of it in leadership where the leaders do sort of what I call performative leadership, rather than values-based leadership.
Big difference. What originally drew you to your current role, CEO of NAPCO, and what's kept you there? It's been about 5 years?
5 years, yeah. I'd been doing interim executive work, so I was the guy that helicopter in somewhere where things started to go off the rails, and I came in as an interim executive for 6 months. But I had an interest in NAPCO. I've known the company all my life. Like I was in the same industry, and I ran a similar business, and I just love some of the things that we do. Like, we work in one of the most iconic environments in the world, and I've got a very strong sense of environmental management and sustainability, and I've built a whole sort of theme through my career around that stuff. And it's an iconic business. It's Australia's third oldest business. It's one of the biggest cattle companies in the world, and so there was a lot of things that attracted me to it. I wasn't particularly enamoured of what I walked into, but the challenge was for me to fix that up. The sort of culture that I wanted to create, and I was starting to get, which is we're an old established cattle company, but with very modern ideas about things like diversity and employment. Like we've got 50% of our workforce is female, and things like that. So I really got invested in the company, and I also got invested in a vision that I had for the future. And one of the things that I did as a leader when I went in there is get everybody aligned on the same, pretty much on the same page. The conversations that I constantly had with people, and ad infinitum, like they really got sick of hearing this from me. But I said, I want you to think about what you would do if you work for the best cattle company in the world. And if you do that, if you think about that and you do that every day, we'll become the best cattle company in the world. So I had this constant narrative around what would you do if you worked for the best cattle company. It can be any company, like it can be the best car company, it can be the best surfboard manufacturer. But what would you do? So it's not about it's about what would you do. So it was about building an attitude. And I because I do values-based leadership, I buy into that stuff, because that's, I need to buy into what I'm asking other people to buy into. So one of the things I do, and I've done in every company I've been to, is build a succession plan in the company, so that the most obvious next person in the company is in the company already, not somebody they bring in from the outside. So I think a lot of CEOs look over their shoulder and say, I'm going to get run over here. But the reality is that you've got to be prepared to be run over. I think one of the things that for a CEO and any sort of leader is that you've got to make yourself redundant. You've got to put yourself in a position where you are no longer needed there in the business, and that's your job done. So,
100% agree. This one I'm really interested in, because you are so calm, cool, collected. What habits, routines or philosophies help you stay grounded and perform at your best?
I think on the calm front, I think I slow things down. So I've got sort of decision time, and that can be frustrating for some people. Some people like things snap, but I slow things down. I also use a thing called the Eisenhower matrix. So you've got 4 quadrants in the decision matrix, and you've got urgent and important, not urgent and important, urgent not important, and not urgent not important. I think the other thing is that I surround myself with the right people all the time. So I've got people that challenge me. I really don't like people that are just going to sit there and say yes to me all the time.
Such a good point.
If I'm challenged, it makes me stop and think about what I'm doing, because you can get overconfident. Hubris takes over.
But challenge, I think, in a respectful way is important.
Yeah.
Because not everyone can challenge in a respectful way.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes it it can be difficult. But I think the respectful piece has got to come from you, not from them. So if people are challenging you, you've got to be respectful of yourself to not be triggered by the way they're challenged. So,
and get offended.
Yeah, because being offended is something we choose to do, not something that necessarily comes from the person you think of
Correct.
is being offensive. So
correct.
So some of the other things I do, and it's an interesting experience for me, but it's a real grounding exercise that I do every week. I'll communicate with the business at least once a week. So at NAPCO, I do a thing I call Friday from the Big Chair. So I'll sit down and write down what's on my mind, and I'll send it out to all the staff every Friday morning. So, and it's not a newsletter for the business. It's about things that are on my mind and areas of the business that I think want attention. Because if we're going to be the best cattle company in the world, we need to keep focused on some of the things that make us the best cattle company in the world. So I'll use it as a general shot over the bows when I see something that I think, well, that's a behaviour that we don't want to see grow within the business. So it's a really good platform for that. But it also makes the CEO real to the people in the business. Like, you need to humanise yourself with the people that are in the organisation, and that's my way of doing it. Yep. So the first Friday from the Big Chair I did it at NAPCO. I wrote a little story, and I call it Granny's Finger. So it's a very human story about my great-great-grandmother who lived in a bark hut with a dirt floor on a waterhole in Western Queensland, and she got bitten on the finger by a snake, so she lopped the finger off with an axe. And my question to people is, if that happened to you, would you cut your finger off with an axe? Because she has 4 little kids. She was on her own. The closest people were 12 kilometres away. She didn't have a horse or a buggy or any. There's no cars in those days. So, and she didn't want to die with 4 little kids because they would have died too. So she just got an axe and chopped a finger off. And it's a true story. It's it's a part of the family history. But my question is to people is, if that happened to you, would you lop your finger off with an axe? How committed are you to what you do? So.
I love everything you said there. And also your point about humanising the person behind the title, especially in a role like yours where, as you said, some of your employees are 1,500 kilometres away. And that's your emails on a Friday. It's making them feel connected to you, and the why behind what are we doing here? Yeah. I'm actually a valued part of NAPCO.
But on the why front, we go around the business every year at this time as the season starts, and we sit down with everybody in the stock camps and the stations, and that's the whole leadership team. So, and we tell them why we want them to do what we want them to do that year. So it's not about, you've got a job, you go and do that. We sit down and we say, this is what the business looks like, these are the things we're going to do this year, and these are the reasons why we do what we do. So you can really lose sight of things when you're doing hard work and you don't know why.
Massively. I think, being connected to the purposes is everything. Yeah. Allan, I'm really keen to know what takes up your time when you are not running a massive pastoral company. I know you do a lot of leadership coaching, mentoring. Yeah. What do you do in your spare time? What gives you energy?
Yeah, one of the things I do is I'm an artist. So I paint oil on canvas. My mother's an artist, so she taught me a lot of the basic skills of painting when I was a kid. But about 20 years ago, I was doing quite a difficult job, and it was quite challenging, and and I needed a bit of stress relief. So I went and bought a cheap canvas, and I painted a painting. And I thought to myself, I can do a lot better than this. So I did the painting again, and I put that painting in an art competition and got second place in the People's Choice Award. And that sort of, I thought, this there's something to this. But I've done a lot of painting now over the years. I've had a number of exhibitions, and I've sold a lot of art, and it's I've got art hanging in all sorts of collections, all sorts of places. And I've got an art website. It's a creative outlet, and I do enjoy it.
Yeah, it's good for the brain. Thank you for sharing. When everything is stripped back, whether in the boardroom or on the ice, what do you believe people need most from their leader?
There's a few things they need. I think they need an integrity. They need to believe that they're what they're being told is a very strong basis of truth. They need values, the value-based leadership. I think one of the things that concerns me more about leaders and people in leadership roles is a lack of courage. I think leaders need to have courage of their convictions. One of my absolute non-negotiables as a leader is that if somebody is going to get run over by a bus, I will be between them and the bus, regardless of what that is. And it's sort of, I think, people follow you through the gates of hell if they know that you'll be there for them. And
finally, last question. If your career had a soundtrack, what 3 songs would feature on it?
What I thought was that if it was a current, like my current career, there's a song by a band called Red Gum called Diamantina Drover, because we have 2 iconic stations on the Diamantina River. So one of them was a station where Waltzing Matilda was written, and the Billabong is actually that it was written about on the station. If I think back in my early years, there's a Van Morrison song called Cleaning Windows, which was about that sort of carefree period in your life where you work and have fun to have enough to play, sort of thing. So, but if I think about my whole career, I'd sort of go to something a little bit more serious and say Vivaldi's 4 Seasons. So I've worked in the heat and the absolute challenge of an Australian summer, and I've worked in Antarctica and the challenges of an Antarctic winter. So you got the summer and the winter, and then spring and autumn. Worked in various different environments. So as an answer, I'd say Vivaldi's 4 Seasons. And again, I think it's just a beautiful piece of music. So,
All right. Thank you for joining us, Allan. It's been so valuable to hear the lessons and reflections that have shaped your journey to date. We'll be back soon with another C-suite leader, continuing our exploration of the stories and experiences that influence who they are beyond the title.